Hello, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Manns, and I'd like to welcome you to the April 4th Coalition Show. This is the March 13th, 2023 edition of the show, and it's been 444 weeks since the closing of the North Adams Regional Hospital. The April 4th Coalition's mission statement is, we are for workers' rights and collective bargaining rights and are against tax breaks for the rich and corporations who ship our jobs overseas. We support all the articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but as is the custom, we put the emphasis on Article 23 at the start of the show. Dick Sadi is going to do 1 and 2.
All right. Article 23, Section 1. Everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment, to just and favorable conditions of work, and protection against unemployment. Everyone, without any discrimination, has the right to equal pay for equal work.
Number 3, everyone who works has the right to just and favorable remuneration, ensuring for himself or herself and his or her family an existence worthy of human dignity and supplemented, if necessary, by other means of social protection. Number 4, everyone has the right to form and join trade unions for the protection of her or his interests. We also at this time do a big thank you to Michael Putnam, who is, I believe, still the program director for the community radio station, WMNBLP 107.1, for airing the audio portion of our show, and a big thank you to all the staff at NBCTC Public Access TV for helping us produce this show.
Yeah, thank you very much. We're going to show 2 videos today,
Okay.
and they're mostly talking about the economy and a lot about unemployment and about interest rates, but about the economy in general. And the first video is going to be a section from Democracy Now!, which is was run about 3 months ago, but it has a professor, I think it's Robert Wolf from the University of Massachusetts Economics Department. I did study at the University of Massachusetts Economics Department. It's a very radical economics department. And then we're going to follow it up with Elizabeth Warren, who is a little bit more moderate than those from the UMass Economics Department, but they seem to be hitting on similar topics. But let's watch them, and then we'll give some comments on it.
Okay.
DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. This week, the United States is facing what Politico calls a Category 5 economic storm, as analysts debate whether the U.S. economy is in a recession and how to respond. Today, the Federal Reserve's announcing another interest rate hike, which it says will help fight against inflation and bring down prices that are up by some 9% since last year, as inflation reaches a 40-year high. This week also marks 13 years since the U.S. last raised its federal minimum wage to $7.25 an hour in 2009, which is the longest time without a raise since the federal minimum wage was first implemented during the Great Depression. To make sense of what all this means for working people, we're joined by the Marxist economist Richard Wolff, Emeritus Professor of Economics at University of Massachusetts Amherst, visiting professor at the New School, and the founder of Democracy at Work, host of Economic Update, and author of several books, including The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. Professor Wolff, welcome back to Democracy Now! Explain what's happening in this country, and also, if you can also define all your terms from inflation to recession so all people have access to this.
Good. Thank you very much, Amy, for the opportunity. Let me try to be as brief as I can. Over the last 30 to 40 years, we have experienced here in the United States a radical redistribution of wealth and income. All manner of economists from all perspectives have done the research. It's all very well known. That has caused epoch-changing problems here in the United States that our political headlines are full of literally every day. But the last 4 years have been a cap on that process that really requires taking a deep breath. Number one, our society was unprepared for and did not well manage a pandemic. that it could have been and should have been much better prepared for, as many other countries were who don't have our wealth or our medical system. About the same time, we had an economic crash. Over half the labor force in this country lost their job for a few weeks or the entire time of 2020 and 2021. We've had viral catastrophes before. We've had economic crashes. We never had them at the same time. That was a body blow to a working class that, as I said, has been suffering for 30 to 40 years. As if that weren't enough, we then had, when we thought we might be out of the worst of the crash and the pandemic, now in the last year, as you just pointed out, we have whacked our working class with an inflation. And make no mistake, what an inflation is, very simple, is a general rise in prices. That's all it means. Not all prices go up the same, not all prices go up, but in general, prices rise. And obviously, as any child will understand, if the prices go up, that hurts most people in the middle and people at the bottom, because they're the ones with the least amount of money to pay the rising prices. It's a discrimination against the middle and the bottom, that is the vast majority. But perhaps what's not understood is who raises the prices. That little economics detail is so often lost. Employers, the class of employers in our society, that's who sets the prices. Employees are excluded from that activity. Employers in the United States are 1% of the population, if that. Those of us who have to take the prices they choose to raise, we are the 99%. And there's no democracy in allowing 1% of the people to set prices that 99% of the people are forced to pay for food, clothing, shelter, and all the rest. So damaging is this inflation, and so unfairly damaging, that the government is called upon, as often happens when the private capitalist system lurches into one extreme or another, the government is called in, please save the system. In our society, our central bank, which is what the Federal Reserve is, in other countries it's called the Bank of France or the Bank of England. Historical reasons we don't call it the Bank of the US, we call it the Federal Reserve. They come in and they are asked, please fix it. And then a kind of magic happens. The Federal Reserve can be honest, admit that its job, which by the way is written into its charter, price stability. That's a fancy phrase for saying, don't let prices go up too much. So clearly, when you have an inflation, the central bank, the Federal Reserve, has failed to maintain price stability. So what is it proposing to do? It's proposing to come in and raise interest rates. As you pointed out, later today, we will have the announcement of the latest raising of the interest rates. What's the idea here? The idea is to make everybody who owes money worse off. Basically, you're going to have to pay more in servicing your debt, in paying off your interest. Your monthly credit card bill will go up, because if you carry a debit there because you've been using your card, they can charge you higher interest now. If you were thinking of buying a car, it's going to cost you more. If you were thinking of borrowing money, a mortgage we call that, to own a home, it's going to cost you more. So the idea is, by making everything more expensive that involves debts, and in our economy now, debt is everywhere, making it more expensive, masses of people, and who again? The middle and the bottom, who are the worst hit by this, they will have to cut back expenditures because they're having to pay more, for example, on their credit card every month, and that will hopefully dissuade the employers from further increases of prices, because you have really whacked the mass of the consumers who can't afford it. Notice in each case that whatever the problem of the economy is, The employers are in the position to raise the prices, to cut the supplies, to do all the things they do, while the rest of us are forced to be passive and to pay for the entirety of this. If I could make a final comment, this is not a sustainable arrangement, not in the sense of ecological unsustainability, but in social unsustainability. You cannot continuously assault the working class for 40 years of redistributed wealth, then a pandemic, then an economic crash, then an inflation, and now tell them, falsely, by the way, that the only way to deal with that is to whack them again with a rising interest rate. It's ironic that Richard Nixon, a conservative Republican president, back in August 15th of 1971, went on the television in our country and said, we have a terrible inflation, which we did, because it constantly comes back. And what I'm going to do, said Mr. Nixon, is declare a price wage freeze. As of tomorrow morning, any business that raises its prices, we will arrest you. Any union that demands or gets higher wages, ditto. Look, it was an extreme measure. Guess what? It worked. We can have a debate about it, but the ironic reality that today we are all talking from the Biden administration and the Republicans as well, as if interest rate increases is the only thing to do. This is a manipulation of the people that has no justification and is more extreme now than I have seen in my lifetime as a professor of economics here in the United States.
But Richard, I'd like to ask you, during the pandemic, in the worst times of the pandemic, the government unleashed an enormous amount of, or borrowed an enormous amount of money to tide the society over. Both obviously the capitalists and employers got a huge share of the bailout money, but so did many Americans, and to the point that the United States now, as I understand it, its debt. It's one of the biggest debtor nations in the world, 137% of GDP in terms of U.S. debt, yet the U.S. dollar continues to be stronger than other currencies in the world economy. Can you explain how that's happening?
Sure. The basic answer is the following. The rest of the world, as your previous interviewee made very clear, the rest of the world is in such terrible shape that before we celebrate the strong dollar, we have to face the reality that the reason loose money, mobile money around the world is leaving countries in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Europe to come to the United States is not because we are in good shape. We aren't. It's because they are in awful shape and they don't know what to do. And the United States for the last 75 years has been the safest place. And they look around the world and they say, okay, we better cash in our euros or our yen or whatever else they have, hold on to dollars. And remember, to buy a treasury security these days, which is what they do, it's how they do that, is to agree to lose money. Because the inflation being 9%, the Treasury doesn't pay you 9% if you buy a Treasury security these days, which means you're putting money in the United States, you're buying a Treasury that may pay you 2, 3, 4, 5% if you're very lucky, but that will be less of an increase over the next year than the cost of everything that a dollar buys. So you're actually losing money by doing that. And it tells you how bad the global economy is now for everybody, that they would come to the United States. And last point, be very careful. This can change on a dime. And if problems arise here in the United States, which the way we have treated our working class guarantees, all we don't know is the forms that crisis will take. Will it be an extreme Republican administration? Will it be a further surge in the unionization drives and the strike drives that we're seeing mushrooming across the United States? But the minute that mobile money from around the world that has come in and strengthened the dollar gets a sense that the United States is spinning out of control, then that money will leave every bit as fast as it came here, and we'll be looking at a dollar dissolving on us, and we'll be talking about that.
And in terms of the continued squeeze, as you've been saying for the past 40 years on the working class and the middle class, it seems that in many countries around the world, that's leading more and more toward fascist movements and right-wing movements than it is to strong left-wing or socialist movements. I'm wondering your sense of what the future holds.
Well, I think what we're seeing in my own sense of it, and I follow it quite closely.
And we have about a minute and a half left, yeah.
Particularly in Europe, is that you're seeing the fruits of the last 75 years. We've lived in a country that has been beset by the Cold War, that is lost in this notion of a great struggle between capitalism and socialism, in which you can't allow anything on the left to get very far without repression by the government or without unfair treatment in the media. So I'm not so surprised that as the situation unravels, the first instinct of people is to be responsive to the right, which has been able to function in the Western world much more freely than the left has. But I don't find that at all surprising. I think when the people of this country realize how few solutions the right wing has, look at what Mr. Trump didn't achieve in all the things he promised, then you'll see an appreciation that maybe we ought to try the left. The crucial question is whether the left will be courageous enough to say what's going on and to offer a real alternative.
Well, Richard Wolff, I want to thank you so much for being with us. Professor Emeritus of Economics at the University of Massachusetts, now visiting professor at the New School here in New York, founder of Democracy at Work, host of Economic Update, author of a number of books, including The Sickness in the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. That does it for our show. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Stay safe, wear a mask.
Hello? Hello?
They're into it.
Oh, okay, they're going right into this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Raised interest rates 8 times over the last year in what has been the most extreme rate hike cycle in 40 years. The Fed's goal is to slow inflation, and your tool, raising interest rates, is designed to slow the economy and throw people out of work. So far, you haven't tipped the economy into recession, but you haven't brought inflation entirely under control either. And maybe the reason for that is that other things are also keeping prices high, things you can't fix with high interest rates, things like price gouging and supply chain kinks and a war in Ukraine. But you are determined to continue to raise interest rates, so I want to take a look at where you're headed. In December, the Fed released its projections on the state of the economy under your monetary policy plan. According to the Fed's own report, if you continue raising interest rates as you plan, unemployment will be 4.6% by the end of the year, more than a full point higher than it is today. Chair Powell, if you hit your projections, do you know how many people who are currently working, going about their lives, will lose their jobs?
I don't have that number in front of me. I will say it's not
just
an
a math
intended
problem.
consequence.
Well, but it is, and it's in your report, and that would be about 2 million people who would lose their jobs, people who are working right now, making their mortgages. So, Chair Powell, if you could speak directly to the 2 million hardworking people who have decent jobs today, who you're planning to get fired over the next year, what would you say to them? How would you explain your view that they need to lose their jobs?
I would explain to people more broadly that inflation is extremely high and it's hurting the working people of this country badly. All of them, not just 2 million of them, but all of them are suffering under high inflation, and we are taking the only measures we have to bring inflation down.
And putting 2 million people out of work is just part of the cost, and they just have to bear it?
Well, will working people be better off if we just walk away from our jobs and inflation remains 5-6%?
Let me ask you about what happens if you do this. Since the end of World War II, there have been 12 times in which the unemployment rate has increased by 1 percentage point within 1 year, exactly what you're aiming to do right now. How many of those times did the U.S. economy avoid falling into a recession?
You know, it's not as black and white as very
Just
very
looking at the numbers, it actually is pretty black
Alan
and white.
Blander's written a book on this, and
There have been 12 times that we've seen a 1 point increase in the unemployment rate in a year. That's exactly what your Fed report has put out as the projection and the plan based on how you're going to keep raising these interest rates. How many times did the economy fail to fall into a recession after doing that? Out of 12 times.
I think the number is 0.
I think the number is 0. That's exactly right. So then the question becomes, we've got 2 million people out of work. Can you stop it at 2 million people? History suggests that the Fed has a terrible track record of containing modest increases in the unemployment rate. Once the economy starts shedding jobs, it's kind of like a runaway train. It is really hard to stop. In fact, in 11 out of the 12 times that the unemployment rate increased by a full percentage point within 1 year, unemployment went on to rise another full percentage point on top of that. If that's what happens this time, we'd be looking at least 3.5 million people who would lose their jobs. So, Chair Powell, if you reach your goal and 2 million people get laid off by the end of this year, and then, just like in 11 out of 12 times that unemployment has risen by a point in a single year, it keeps on rising. And then we've got 2.5 million people out of work. We've got 3 million people who get laid off. We've got 3.5 million people who get laid off. What's your plan?
Well, right now the unemployment rate is 3.4%, which is the lowest in 54 years. And we actually don't think that we need to see a sharp or enormous increase in unemployment to get inflation under control.
I'm looking at your projections. Do you call laying off 2 million people this year not a sharp increase in
I would say
unemployment?
4.5%.
Explain that to the 2 million families who are going to be out of work.
We're not targeting any of that. But I would say even 4.5% unemployment is well better than most of the time for the last 75 years.
In other words, you don't have a plan to stop a runaway train if it occurs. Chair Powell, you are gambling with people's lives, and there's a pile of data showing that price gouging and supply chain kinks and the war in Ukraine are driving up prices. You cling to the idea that there's only one solution: lay off millions of workers. We need a Fed that will fight for families, and if you're not going to lead that charge, we need someone at the Fed who will.
Here. Yeah.
That's her. She's
sort of-
always clear and concise about what she wants to see
Yeah,
happen.
and she is not a socialist. She's a capitalist. She
No,
says
she's a
that.
capitalist.
She
She
just
is.
studies the numbers, and she knows who gets affected, and she's fighting for those people.
Who are her constituents. So
There's
kudos to Elizabeth and kudos to Richard Wolff for clearly explaining inflation. I already know inflation is an artificial problem because really, who's raising the prices?
exactly, and who's profits?
Who's
yeah,
profiting? So therefore, whenever I hear inflation is going up and it's going to crash the economy, well, yeah, it might. What
Corporate
it might do is
yeah.
gum up the works of money going into the system because people who can't afford to buy won't buy. So raising inflation rates isn't going to solve your problem. Lowering your prices is going to do it. And yes, I remember Richard Nixon I remember everybody being stunned that he did it. It took about 9 months, but it worked. 9 months of capping everything where it was so people could get their feet back under them and feeling stable.
Right. There's just a few corporations that or entities that have control over a vast amount of things that we buy.
Yes.
And they control the profit. They set their profit point, and they keep raising the prices. And if we have no other place to buy those things, we have to buy them.
Right.
And so I think instead
You
of
wanna break up-
concentrating on raising interest rates, they should be concentrating their efforts on finding out who's gouging the American people and why, and stop that.
And that always seems to be the problem for Congress and everybody, in the government, to go after it because of the lobbying money that goes
Right,
in. You know, do you bite? They have to decide if they're going to bite the hand that feeds them or bite the hand that votes for them.
The Citizens United, by that decision by the Supreme Court, said that corporations were people, and their spending on
Free speech is
free speech, so they could put as much money as they want into politics, and that's
ruined us.
Yeah, that's taken away our political system. It's taken the hands out of democracy is one person, one vote. But if they control 90% of all the money, then they can control and manipulate the elections
and the system.
and warp our vision of what the problems are.
Yes.
They
can tell a story that
we
they
can
want
we
to
can
tell.
watch all these news programs about, he said this and he said this
that.
and the poll numbers are this and this and that. That's not it. What we want to know about news is how are people, everyday people, how are they making it? Why are there so many people without health insurance? Why are there so many people unemployed? Why are there so many people without housing? Why are housing prices skyrocketing? Why is it hard for people to make the rent? That's the news, and we want to see how that is and how we can correct the problem. That's what we have.
That's real news as opposed to what we get now from talking heads. And that's true on both sides.
Right, exactly. That's where the money is. That's where the money is. To get people interested, they talk about politics like a horse race. It's a horse race, just like all this gambling and everything. Well, who's going to win? And that's not it. What are the conditions right now? What are people going through? And how to share that so people can see a common, get rid of that alienation where they feel like they're alone.
Correct.
This is like we the people. That means we're not alone. So we have to see if there's someone struggling, we have to go and help those people. So we're getting down to.
We got 35 seconds. You got time to get one more point across if you want to.
Power to the people, and we have to educate ourselves.
We have to educate, and then we have to vote in a block so that we can affect things. It doesn't matter. I hate to say this, if you're a Democrat or a Republican, that's a label. It's what the person does for you that matters. Do you believe they're working for you? Do you believe they're helping you? It's not, hey, I don't think all Republicans are bad. I don't think all Democrats are good. It's just.
We just need protection from unemployment.
Yes, we do. And we'll see you next week.
Power to the people.
Oh, yeah.
There's power in the factory, power in the land, power in the hand of the worker. But it all amounts to nothing if together we don't stand. There is power in our union. Now the lessons of the past were all learned with workers' blood. The strikes of the bosses we must pay for. From the cities and the farmlands to trenches.